It's great to have you joining us on Radio Free Georgia's In Tune to Nature program. I'm host Carrie Freeman, coming to you from Atlanta in January of 2023. And today we're going to be talking about multiculturalism in terms of the creativity and morality found in the cultures of various animal species, besides the human species, through a discussion with Dr. Carol Gigliotti, author of the book The Creative Lives of Animals by NYU Press, published in 2022. Carol Gigliotti is an author, artist, animal activist, and scholar whose work focuses on the reality of animals' lives as important contributors to the biodiversity of this planet. She is Professor Emerita of Design and Dynamic Media and Critical and Cultural Studies at the Emily Carr University of Design, Vancouver, BC, in Canada. She has a BSS of Performance Studies, a Master's of Fine Arts in Printmaking, and a PhD from the Advanced Computing Center of Arts and Design at The Ohio State University. Dr. Gigliotti is the editor of the book Leonardo's Choice: Genetic Technologies in Animals, and the author of numerous book chapters and journal essays. Her work is supported by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada and the Sitka Center for the Arts, among others. She's on a number of international advisory boards concerned either with media or with animal studies. Her new book, The Creative Lives of Animals, which we will discuss today, challenges the current assumptions of creativity, offering a more comprehensive understanding through recognizing animal creativity, cognition, consciousness, and agency. Her website is her name, carolgigliotti.com. Let me spell that. Carol starts with a C, and her last name is spelled Gigliotti. Welcome, Dr. Gigliotti.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so glad to finally have you on the show.
Yeah.
Over the last decade, we've seen a lot of impactful books highlighting the various capabilities of fellow animal species, especially related to their cognitive and emotional abilities and how we've underestimated other animals. And your latest book adds to this pioneering field of animal studies work. What unique ideas were you wanting to contribute by researching and writing the book, The Creative Lives of Animals?
Yeah, all my creative work, writing and visual arts, has been about our relationship with animals and also relationships that cause them pain and suffering. So since the early 2000s, while I'd been writing in that sort of genre about genetic technologies and the animal industrial complex, I was also collecting research on animal creativity. And I realized at some point I really wanted to write about animals' creativity because not only did I find it fascinating, which really it was a fun book to write, but I wanted to visualize for people that animals are more than victims, because that's a lot of how we talk about them. But they're actually very powerful and essential beings who contribute as individuals to biodiversity and the flourishing of this planet. So I thought that was an important thing to do.
Right. It's another way to show respect for their capacities.
Yes.
To see them, especially when we think of creativity as something that's more human.
You know? Yes.
So many kind of arrogant assumptions we tend to make just about our species. But I would think creativity is one that is not, most people have not given it to animals, maybe outside of a few animals that do, like birds that do creative dances or something. Outside of that, I think we're just kind of, we've been a little blind to it.
Yeah. And there's lots of research I found. Lots. And when it wasn't specifically about creativity, it was what I did was sort of try to tease out the idea that it was creativity, because of course I taught creativity for way too long, 30 years or so.
Oh, that's great. And there's so many chapters I could focus on in the book, but I chose the last chapter on culture because as an animal protection advocate, I'm especially fascinated by work that helps us acknowledge that humans are not the only animal species with a culture, and thus to respect multiculturalism includes respecting non-human cultures too. So I wanted to focus our interview today on the culture chapter in your book. And you outline a variety of scholarly definitions of the word culture. Which definition of culture do you find most comprehensive and universally applicable, and why?
As you said, culture in animals sometimes, well, it was very contentious when I started researching it. And then actually, when I got to that chapter, literally while I was writing the chapter, sorry, let me just have a little drink of water. There goes my voice.
I was just drinking some tea too.
Oh boy. Exactly what you said, the acceptance of culture in animals was really difficult for people and scientists to accept, and researchers. It was really, really difficult. But by the time I got to the end of that chapter, it wasn't. It was really interesting. Yeah. So one of the things that, or one of the definitions I thought was really useful was Grant Ramsey, who's a philosopher of biology. And he constructed another definition, hoping, that human cultural researchers and those who study culture in animals both might use it. And he says, and this is a quote, information transmitted between individuals and groups. And you notice that very broad term, information and transmitted between individuals or groups, where this information flows through and brings about the reproduction of and a lasting change in the behavioral trait. And I really like that definition, but I think the simplest one and the one that really, I think, makes a difference to people, because it's so true for us too, was Hal Whitehead's and Luke Rendell's definition in their book, The Culture of Whales and Dolphins. The way we do things.
Yeah.
And I love that. That's just, that's exactly what culture is for us as well. And it is for so many animals as well.
Yeah. And it's something, and the way we do things is passed down. And that's why, even though it'll adjust itself, over the years, right, and it changes. And that's why we know it's not completely instinctual, and that there's, aspects of choice there. But in some of that from the former definition is like, we tell each other and help to reinforce constantly, like, yes, the way we do things, or the right way to do things, or maybe new ways of doing things, or
well, and there's actually Kevin Leyland, who was one of the first people involved in looking at creativity in animals, has a book out, and says that's where animals lose it, is in culture. And of course, that's that's not true. Yeah. Which he's, I think, come on board with. So, because they do pass it on, and they pass it on through communication, and sometimes social learning, just all the different ways that we do.
And can you give us some examples that you used in the book? A lot of them are from whales and dolphins related to animal cultures.
Yeah. I thought one of the most interesting ones, and kind of, oops, there goes my, and really kind of sad though, was that even in the same waters, some orca ecotypes eat fish, some eat mammals. So what I read was in the Pacific Northwest, there are 3 distinct ecotypes, and Antarctica has 4. So, and this is in Whitehead and Rendell's book, 3 mammal-eating orcas were captured off the coast of British Columbia. That is a problem in itself, and housed with fish-eating orcas. So those mammal-eating orchids refused to eat the salmon they were given, brace yourself, for 75 days. And one of the 3 died rather than eat it. And then the other 2, I guess, decided, okay, they took 4 more days, and then they began to eat the fish that they were given.
Because
And by this time,
biologically, they could, like the orcas could all either maybe all eat seals or all eat salmon or both, but certain cultures are like, seal eaters, and then some of
yes,
them are salmon eaters. And so
yes,
you could
yes,
see in that example how they just did not want culturally inappropriate food, even at
no,
the risk of dying. I mean, that's extreme.
yes. And so actually they were taken out of the people who captured them just put them back.
Oh,
Really,
like in the ocean or back in
yeah,
captivity?
no, in the ocean they just let them go
Oh,
because they were
good.
too much trouble, right?
Yeah,
um
good for
but
them.
orca cultures are really interesting because they're very picky eaters.
Yeah.
But there are lots of ways in which the ecotypes, which is actually the different kinds of cultures, really, of orcas. The culture in their lives is very, very important.
Yeah.
And actually, if I could just give you another example
Yeah.
from not a mammal, which I
Okay.
think
Yeah,
is
great.
also really interesting. And this is from entomologist Mark Moffat, whose book, uh, Life with Ants, A Cast of Millions, which is a really fun book to read.
Yeah.
And he says, and he's one of the top entomologists, through ancient languages, ants use, chemical signals. They respond to the bonds and needs of their nestmates.
Hmm.
And like us, they cooperate to
Yeah.
meet those needs, sometimes by altering nature. They build fortresses, stockyards, highways, and nurseries. This was one of the things that just kind of blew me away when I first started doing the research
Yeah.
early on. And they do that, to really keep their communities together and flourishing.
Yeah.
They, obtain and they distribute resources and labor. They preserve civil unity, something that we just really have trouble with. And they defend against intruders.
Yeah.
So I really, wanted to give those two, because you have a mammal such as an orca that we look at as, well, yeah, they're intelligent and they might do that. But then ants, which, many of us consider to be pests.
Yeah.
Uh, so
We don't tend to respect non-mammals as much since we're mammals. And also the smaller the creature, the more
mhm,
insignificant, which is kind of a trivial way to make decisions about somebody's worth. But I think that's what we tend to do. The
right.
larger animals we tend to value more.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
megafauna is where we'll be a little more generous than with, the animals, or the, like, insects or reptiles or
Yes.
amphibians. So
Now, creativity can also reflect an individual animal's problem solving and may not be a widespread practice across the whole species culture.
right,
Can
right.
you share an anecdote regarding an example of how some individual may prove more creative than their pack mates or other family members?
Yeah, and I gave this example at the beginning of the book because it actually, I only found out about it, was only sort of publicized when I was finishing up the introduction, because I wrote the introduction. I wrote it and then I rewrote it last.
Right.
you know.
Yes, a good
Um,
writer. Yeah.
so there was a chimpanzee in captivity, but in a very large, sort of enclosure that was very natural. Still don't like it, but in any case. And her name was Julie. And at some point, she decided that she wanted to wear a leaf as an earring. And so she put the leaf into her, behind her ear, and it sort of hung down. And what was so interesting was that I think it was 13 members of her companions actually took that up and began wearing earrings.
I knew she was going to make a fashion statement, like when you're like, hey, I like that.
I know. And
that's what we do too. Like
yes,
we copy other people who we think are creative and as role models.
And, I think this happens quite a bit with animals, and we just don't notice it because we're so oblivious.
Yes.
And I count myself into an oblivious person. Even now, I mean, I get busy and I know I'm missing things. And so, if I could and I was, completely rich, I would just lie around and watch animals, but
pay close attention to these.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when you do pay close attention, it's just so exciting and interesting and kind of astounding, because the kind of creativity that animals show is really quite wonderful.
Yeah. If you're just joining us on Radio Free Georgia, this is In Tune to Nature, and I'm host Carrie Freeman, talking about the cultures and creativity of animal species with Dr. Carol Gigliotti, author of the book, The Creative Lives of Animals, published by NYU Press. Her website is her name, carolgigliotti.com. Dr. Gigliotti, you also get into examples of creative morality within animal cultures. And I often cite Beckoff and Pierce's book, Wild Justice, when I want to talk about ethics in various animal societies, a book you also reference among others. What did you discover about how certain animal species exhibit a sense of morals?
Well, I want to thank you for bringing up this particular topic, because you're the only interviewer so far that has. Everybody else was
I'm so into, well, I teach ethics, and animal ethics just stands out to me. And I like it. I want to say we're not the only ethical animal, and so because that's another reason we tend to privilege ourselves, is like, oh, look how great we are. We're talking about ethics. Well, a lot of other beings, they may not talk about it, but they practice it.
Yes, exactly. Which is, something that I also talk about in the book a bit, that, when it's sometimes the decision to be ethical is not really a pre-thought that one has, but you just jump into something like, saving a baby from fire. It's something I've not done, but other people have done.
But you would do it, Carol. You know it.
Yeah, I hope so.
Given the chance, yes.
So yeah, I mean, one of the things I think that's really interesting is that the emotional part of both creativity and ethical behavior is very, very important. And it's something that sometimes philosophers don't even like to talk about, especially analytical philosophers. It's very much a logical thought process to be ethics, whenever, again, the emotional part of being ethical plays quite a large role. And, in creativity as well. And I do think that those two things together are really what morality is about, because so often the decision or the impulse to be ethical or to be kind, to be compassionate, is a creative one. In order to actually act on that impulse, sometimes one has to be creative,
especially if there's a conflict. And that's really when ethics comes in, like, okay, there's conflict between us, and I need to resolve this with the least force possible, or in the kindest way possible. How can I do that?
Yeah. The first, maybe one of the ones that just a short thing that Stephanie Preston and Franz de Waal write about this, and they talk about the fact that rats in captivity, again, not so hot, but and I tried to give mostly examples from animals who were not in captivity, but sometimes the ones in captivity were almost more impressive, because they were in a state that, of course, they were
going to be forced to prove all these things about themselves.
Yeah. So rats will choose releasing a trapped cage mate over the ability for them to access attractive food.
That's so generous. It's showing generosity.
Yes. And if they have if they have been able to rescue their friend, they share the rewards then with, with
Wow.
the
Yeah.
previously trapped rat. And then they say, even if they are blocked from releasing their friend, they still try, they make attempts to help.
Yeah.
And so those kinds of activities, I think that's where the creativity comes in. I think where, well, that didn't work. Let me try another way to help my friend here.
I think this was the chapter where you talked about like a wolf dog that you had to take care of for a while that was mixed in with your other dog family.
Yes. Yes.
And then one of your little dogs decided, I think, to bite the wolf based on some kind of food aggression, which was really not a good idea. But the wolf decided to be creatively compassionate in his response, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was quite a large wolf, and Sophie, my crazy part golden retriever, it was not the first time she had bit somebody or another animal. So, but she just marched right over there and bit Thunder in his haunch and drew blood.
Oh gosh.
I know. And like I say in the book, it was the only time I ever saw Thunder, sort of morph into this wolf of fable. He turned around and he, and
Oh, that must have been
everybody
pretty scary.
was
Because I mean,
scary.
he could have killed your other dog if he wanted to, if he chose to.
Absolutely. But then he
Chose
stopped.
not to.
And that was it. He was telling her, go away. So she left, and I was like, oh my goodness, thank goodness. So then I turned around, and literally she came right back over and tried to bite him again. And instead of, he knew, and there had been other chances for him to not be nice. I actually, if you wanted to, with one or more of the, the dogs I had. But with her particularly, he had always treated her with respect and kind of stayed away from her.
Right.
But what he did was he just took his whole body and he threw it over the food.
Right. And problem solved.
Problem solved. You're not getting my food. Which I at that point, I grabbed her collar and I put her in the other room. I was like, oh, nothing ever happened other than that. But
and he gave you a chance to help resolve. I mean, both he and you got involved to resolve it in a using creativity in a compassionate way, that because that's what you learn in ethics, is to that any kind of problem should be resolved with the least force or least harm possible. And that's what Thunder the wolf chose to do in that situation instead of attacking her back. But he had to figure out, how do I protect my food without hurting her?
And I think that's very creative. I mean, I think in lots of situations, in terms of ethics, we're kind of faced with two not very great decisions.
Right.
They're both not really palatable. And how do we choose those, or maybe make up a third one that is very useful and isn't so negative?
Yeah. Well, we've got to wrap up pretty soon, but I wanted to just ask you real quick, what lesson do you hope readers take away from your Creative Lives of Animals book?
What I want people to take away, they can take away whatever they want, but what I'd like them to take away, is the creativity of animals exists on the individual, group, species, and ecosystem level. And the loss of an individual animal is the loss of that individual's unique contribution to those interacting levels. And of course, I really think, and I say this in the epilogue, that is a really important thing to take away for wildlife conservation.
Right. The focus on the individual and not just the group, as if every member is interchangeable with anyone else.
Because they're not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I don't know if you can answer this last question in like 30 seconds, but for listeners who are interested in learning about animal cultures, what would you suggest they read or watch, or maybe an organization or conference they could go to?
Yeah, I'll just give you a couple things. Get the book Animal Architecture. It's illustrated. It's a fantastic book. They're just wonderful photographs. You will never think about any kind of insect again in the same way.
Yeah.
Allison and James Kaufman, they have a book called Animal Creativity and Innovation that came out as an edited book in 2015. Lots of interesting stuff in there. And then if you really want to be addicted to something, go to the Cornell Ornithology Lab and look at what you mentioned in the beginning, the Birds of Paradise Project.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about it is how the researchers went back and photographed every single bird of paradise from what the males did from the female's point of view.
To see their creative dances.
Yes, but only from the female's point of view. That was what they went back to do.
Yeah.
And that is really interesting and gives one great pause, I think.
That's awesome. Well, thank you. That's the end of our show, but I want to thank you, Carol Gigliotti, for being with us on Radio Free Georgia's In Tune to Nature program. And thanks for your years of working, developing critical animal studies, and good luck with your book, The Creative Lives of Animals.
Thank you very much. I was really happy to be here.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to In Tune to Nature, broadcasting every Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, online at wrfg.org and on Atlanta radio station 89.3 FM. We post action items, news, and podcasts on the show's website, facebook.com/intune to nature. The views and opinions expressed on this show do not necessarily reflect those of WRFG, its board, staff, or volunteers. I'm one of those volunteers. I'm host Carrie Freeman, asking you to please support independent, non-commercial media like Radio Free Georgia. And remember to use your own creativity to take care of yourself and others, including other species. Thank you for listening. Cheers.